Okay, in this series, we're going to talk a little bit about critical thinking, very, very, very basic steps. And really, critical thinking, although it's thinking in your head, most really, it's presented and how we know that somebody's actually thinking critically, it's by the way they use the language. So we're going to start off with the idea of using language. And of course, you've been using language since you're about 1 year old, so you think you really know how to use it, and most of us really do. And you might be really a pretty good talker also. You can convince your friends of all sorts of things, which movies to go to, which restaurants are good or bad, to support a political candidate, maybe to convince your mom or your lover, that you were someplace where you weren't, or something like that. And, these are really important skills. But they're not based on critical thinking. And the critical thinking is what you're going to need to be successful in school, or certainly in psychology. So in order to do that, let's first look at what language is, and the basics of language, or some ideas that we want to talk about. What can we start with? Well, usually one of the most important aspects, one of the important things that we do with language is we describe things. We use language to describe things. We tell friends about a place that we saw, about a witness tells a jury, what he saw or she saw. A professor will tell you what happens when you add heat to materials, etc., etc., etc. So describe certain things, and of course we're all familiar with descriptions. We do that all the time. Now, a second idea is not quite the same, very different, that we do to evaluation. We say something is good or bad. We're giving an idea of what we think of our perception, how we understand something to be. Certainly we do that about people. We talk about, the game was great we saw, or the professor is lousy, or she's so judgmental, or things like that. The food was delicious. So it's a nice dichotomy, two different ways of looking at things. It could either be descriptive or evaluative. But you know what? It's not really a great distinction when you think about it. It's really not. And I'll tell you why. Because many times when we describe things, we think, first let's see the difference between them. The difference is that when we try to describe something, the idea is that we're trying to be objective. We're not letting our feelings get into it. We're trying to be objective, okay? When you want to evaluate something, you're trying not to be objective. You're trying to say, this is the way I feel about it. This is my own personal experience of it. It's not yours, it's not somebody else's, it's what I think of it. The food was tasty, right? Okay, that means I think it was tasty. You don't like it? Your problem, okay? But it doesn't really work as a good dichotomy, okay? And the reason is because even when we're trying to be objective, many of the words themselves have different connotations and meanings and implications and emotions considered that are integral and move with those particular type of words. You say something the one way and somebody will hear it another way, and it could be not negative, it could be positive, it could be both, but it's not always 100%, and that really becomes very sloppy. And it's, if you use words in a sloppy manner, then your thinking will be sloppy, and it's going to be hard to develop good thinking, critical thinking skills. And because thinking, the sloppy words, sloppy thinking, it's hard to say exactly that somebody's going to be listening to you, and you're going to be able to dissect it and evaluate and analyze in a proper way. And the problem is even worse when you're describing people, which of course with psychology we do that a lot, okay? If your friend says, the apple is sweet, right? You know exactly, and your friend will know exactly what it means. If somebody says to you, well, my friend is really sweet, well, what does that mean? What is your friend doing that makes him or her sweet? Some people are sweet in one way, other people are sweet in another way. It's not like you're tasting. You don't take a bite out of your friend and say, oh, that's really sweet. No, it's much more difficult to know what she means when she says it's very sweet. You need more explanations, okay? Guy goes home and says, I go home, at night I see my wife is really hot. What does he mean? Well, he means that the air conditioner is broken. He sees that she's having hot flashes. Or he might mean that there's some other sort of things he's trying to say which have other sort of implications altogether, maybe more desirable qualities. In other words, it's not quite so precise. So one of the first skills that you need to develop in order to have a critical mind is to be able to identify alternative ways of saying the same thing, of describing a phenomena, right? And in a way that sort of attacking it from different levels and understanding the way the person is saying it to you and where they're coming from in order to identify these things. So it's important not only for you to identify the connotation that you're hearing, right? But also think of alternative words that might mean close enough to the same thing that you would say, well, it is this and not that. Right? Because if you can decide, well, it is a particular thing and not something else, you'll know whether it's positive or negative or whatever it is. Let me give you some examples. Okay? An old man, right? He could be described as an old man, or we can describe as a mature man, or an idealistic teenager, right? Idealistic, he believes in freedom and let's go and change the world, but he can also be described as naive. A bungee jumper, right, might be described as brave. Boy, he's really brave, he can jump off, but on the other hand, somebody else might say he's reckless. Think that maybe if you're in a time, let's say you're in a situation, right, everybody's doing something which you think is wrong, right, and you have to decide, how am I going to deal with this? Am I going to go along with them, or am I going to stand up? So the question is, if you're pressured to comply with what everybody else is doing, what is it? Are you spineless because you're giving in? Or are you just being cooperative because I want to work and I'll be a team player? Same behavior, different description. I have an Uncle Irvin, right? He's been called really, really interesting. I think he's just plain weird, right? Same sort of thing, same idea, different size. Julie has been very empathic with her husband. Very empathic, right? She tries her best. She goes to a therapist. The therapist says she's a codependent. She's, you're thinking too much. My friend Dimitri, right? He's one of the most creative people I know. But my other friend Kevin says he thinks Dimitri's a little bit psychotic. You see, you can use the same, different words to explain, to do the same thing. In the exercise, which I will assign to you for this week, that is what you're going to be looking to do, to be able to find alternative words that have the opposite type of connotation, even though it's describing possibly the same phenomenon, the same thing, the same object, the same concept. Okay? But on the other hand, you might want to know, especially for those who are not in my class, you might want to know what this does for you. How do you take this and build this into part of your life? And I'll tell you, the reason that there's a couple of things you can do with these ideas that you can apply right now, and you can keep them forever. Okay? First, the first thing, you should remember that even when something sounds descriptive, somebody's describing something, it can never be 100% neutral. There's always something from the person, from his own self, that is being into that supposedly objective description. That's because the descriptions come from people. And people have their own thoughts and their own, they can't be completely objective or neutral. So that's the first thing. The second thing, okay, since you are a person with your own experiences and your own opinions, your own statements yourselves can't be, you can say you're being objective, but it's never, your own statements are never, ever 100% objective. No matter how much you try, it will not be 100% objective. And so you need to become aware of your own personal biases and how your personal biases and thoughts and opinions color your language and the way you use your language. Third, recognize when you describe something, it is really your own perspective. So avoid presenting them as objective. It's not that it's not only that you realize that you're not objective, you don't tell, my words are 100%. Don't even present it that way. Okay? Other people's views are just as valid no matter what they are saying. There's a valid because it's valid from their point of view. You don't have to agree with it, right? That's a different thing, but there's a validity to it. And you accept them as valid from their point of view. Even if you disagree. It doesn't mean you have to agree. Validity and agreement are not always the same. And lastly, when you listen to other people and the way they use language, recognize that their choice of words will reflect their own particular point of view, which we just said was valid from their point of view. Okay? And it reflects their own personal values and biases, whatever they are. And those things you can take away with you. Okay, now, don't forget to do the assignment that you can find on Blackboard. And if you have any questions, make sure to contact me.